Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Certainty Talks. On this show, we talk about certainty, a topic that feels more important today than ever before, but all in all, always an important topic. We got my good friend and business partner here in the Whale Club, Paul Sparks, not only a successful real estate investor, but also a certified certainty advisor. Now, we do the show because I learned from a wise man that if you look at the last 3 years of your business by months and turn all the negative months into zeros, what do you think would happen to your bottom line? And that wise man is Dan Nicholson. And we're here to achieve financial certainty by rigging the game in your favor. Now, I am on a mission to create 100 millionaires. Information on this podcast alone is enough to help you become a millionaire in the next 5 to 7 years. If you'll take consistent action, you will become one. And if you get value today, please share this episode right now. That way we can all grow together. Now, Paul and I are going to be talking about some things that might cause some open loops. When that happens, don't be in a rush to close that loop. Keep it open. Be receptive. You're going to hear some things that might make more sense later on with that loop open, whereas if you close it, you might miss out on some important details. So let's start off with some 6-word updates. What do you got, Paul?
Always know which currencies I'm trading.
Oh, that's really good. That was really timely. That's really good. I feel ashamed now. All right. So my 6-word update, meeting Whale Club members brought certainty.
I like it.
Yeah. You know, like what we got a chance to do when we were in Denver meeting all the fellow Whale Club members is hearing what's important to other people on the other side, right? Like we're the real estate side. We got the blockchain side. What's important to the crypto folks, right? So talking to them gave us more clarity on our purpose and our mission, how to successfully get there. So, you got some love here from Fraternal House. So today we're going to be talking about what people get wrong about currency. So, you know, before I met Paul, you know, I kind of look at this basically, you know, time, money, and energy. But since I've met with Paul, there's a few more currencies that we're not thinking about. So you want to lead us off here?
Sure. Yeah, it's funny because oftentimes you're like, yeah, I learned this from Paul, and it's like sometimes I feel a little bit like I got this from Nick and Dan, right? So most of this stuff came as a result of learning through the Certainty Certified Advisor program. You guys have heard us refer to CCA. That's what this is. What we do in the Whale Club is we teach a version of that. The CCA is a 22-week program. I mean, it was like 2 hours a day, once a week, for 22 weeks. And so we are taking that information, we're bringing it to you guys here in these types of, in this podcast specifically. This is what we cover in the Whale Club. We teach the Certainty operating system and how to use it. And so anyways, yeah, most of this is all from Nick and Dan, and I'm happy to be able to share this. But yeah, let's talk about the currencies that we trade. And luckily, we have a fantastic acronym for that. Yep. As you know, it wouldn't be a good tool if it didn't have a good acronym, right? Or some sort of easy way to remember it. So we talk about the acronym TIMER. And I apologize for those who aren't able to see my my screen if you're listening to this recorded. But I like to draw on the whiteboard, so that's what I'm going to do. So we have this acronym, TIMER. And these are the currencies that we trade. Most of us are probably familiar with time, you know, maybe not so much with recognizing impact and influence, but we're certainly aware of money. We're certainly aware of energy or effort, let's say, kind of the same thing. And then lastly, reputation/relationships. I don't know if you can see that, but
yep.
This is how, you know, we were sort of taught to think through the different currencies that we trade. So let's use some real world examples. Before I got into real estate investing, I had what a lot of people have, a job, right? We have a job. And why do we have a job? A lot of times it's because we need money. We got to pay for things. So what do? We trade our time and our energy for money. Now, a lot of times, you know, you could make an argument that, you know, on your team, you're making a large impact in people's lives. Certainly can be true. You know, you're growing your relationships and your reputation at that job. Certainly can be true. This can also apply obviously in the entrepreneurial world. You and I, if you're like me, I got into business so that I could get my time back.
Right.
I wanted to have passive income so that I didn't have to spend all my time and my energy working for money. Is that kind of how you see it? That's what most entrepreneurs think.
Yeah, I mean, I
right?
think if you go back to Rich Dad Poor Dad, right, which it's amazing, like, it launched so many entrepreneurs, particularly in real estate. And, you talk about Poor Dad was talking about always trading time for money. Poor Dad was always working for more money, always had a job. But Rich Dad traded money for time, right? So, inclusive in that is the effort component, but I don't remember that part when they were talking about Rich Dad, right? It was really just the poor trade time for money and the wealthy trade money for time. And that was it. As far as I knew, right? Like, for the longest time, those were the only two currencies. I wasn't ever thinking about other currencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, passive, right? That word passive income, and it implies a level, of effort that's being applied. Like, it insinuates low effort, right? We're gonna use these assets that we've worked so hard, we traded our time and our money to get them, and our energy to get them, so that now they'll kick out money with very little time and energy. So those are fairly obvious examples, right? We buy rental properties for a reason, so that we can get money, so we don't have to use our time and our energy. But there's two other major sections here that oftentimes I think that we skip over, and it's obvious. I think the other week we used some examples of some of the guys in CG, and we were talking about Eric Brewer, but I'm going to use Leon as an example this time, right? Leon's been on your show, and it's just a pleasure to know that man. He makes a massive impact and influences a ton of people's lives. You could argue that he trades his time and his energy for impact, influence, and relationships. That's where he gets his energy from. And so it's not all about money. A lot of us get into business, and all of the things that we're doing a lot of times end up, this is what I was doing, was trading a lot of my time and my energy for money. But you realize that at a certain point, and we talked about this on our wheel call this week, or on our cohort call, about, how much money is enough? How do you know when you've got enough money? And you guys were talking about, I forget who it was you were mentioning, had a really good, maybe it was it Tom Kroll that was saying that, about the only way to know how much money, it's like, to know how much money you can get, you have to get to the end and blow yourself up. Like, that's the only way to know how much you can get.
I think the quote that Jason Lewis was sharing on the call was a quote from Tom Kroll, which was something along the lines of, the only way to really gain your freedom is to cap your financial aspirations.
Bingo, that's what it was.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to have more freedom, then you have to stop wanting. You have to stop chasing. So let me ask you this, right? Because we're talking about impact and influence. How is that a currency that's expended? It just seems like, it feels to me like that should be, evergreen. I don't know if effervescence is the right word, but like, it shouldn't go away. So how do we can buy influence, right? This is like basically like taking politicians out to dinner, or like sponsoring their campaigns. You can definitely buy impact and influence, but how do you spend impact and influence? How does that go down?
That's interesting. Well, certainly these are different types of currencies, right? Yeah. Time is spent differently than we spend money. I would argue that time is probably our most precious of the currencies that we have. But when we talk about, let's say, influence or impact, how do you spend that? I think oftentimes it's coupled with energy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's going to the masterminds, it's coaching your team, it's staying late to help that, salesperson that's
well, I'm kind of wondering if it's kind of like reputation, right? So like, if I have massive influence, right? Like right now I'm in a pretty good spot in my life, I have a pretty good reputation, right? But if I start sponsoring anybody and everybody, right? We take Real Estate Disruptors and we take this person that just did their first deal and we put them on the show. It's going to hurt my reputation. It's also going to hurt my influence. But is that kind of an exchange? Like, maybe hypothetical scenario, guy gets 50 grand on a podcast. So I take the money comes in, the reputation and influence goes away.
Sure. Well, that's it. It's like you can hurt your reputation or your influence by doing negative things. And so that's why I say it's different. Like they're not traded one for one. Yeah. It's like you have to recognize that when you trade your influence and you do something that could potentially impact your team negatively, there's trade-offs to that. It might mean you're going to have to spend more energy later to clean that up.
Yeah.
Like you
ride your team too hard. You're going in there, you're yelling at them, you're riding them too hard. Guys that need more sales, hit the phones. What the heck are you guys doing in there? That's a lot of effort. And for short term, we'll get more money.
Well, it could cost you money too, right?
Oh, long term. But short term, I'm getting more money, but reducing my influence immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think through, let's bring it back to, you presented over the whale club, the certainty event over the weekend, and on our cohort this week, we were talking about this term solvable problem. And how do you think these currencies relate to the solvable problem?
So the solvable problem, we're talking about wanting to get a certain amount of money by a certain amount of time, right? With varying the effort and reputation along the way, right? Because you want to make sure if you're not on pace, you want to increase the effort and potentially increase the risk, which could hurt your reputation. Or if you're well on your way, then you reduce your effort and your risk, which again may kind of correlate with reputation. I'm not entirely sure, but there's time, there's money by a certain amount of time, and based off where you are on that equation, you modify your effort.
Well, I mean, you're talking about like a financial solvable problem, which is what we talk about mostly in the Whale Club, because I would just say that most of us, when we get into entrepreneurship, that's the first and maybe most important problem that we want to solve. I mean, you told the story of the Mexican fisherman, right? So we know money is not necessarily always the most important thing, but a lot of us, we get into entrepreneurship because we're saying, well, hey, if I can create enough passive income, it'll allow me to trade that money for influence. A lot of times, so we say reputation, relationships. So when I think of that, I think of, the future family and the kids that I want to have, right? You've got kids. And so what's the impact you're having on them when you're trading all your time and your energy just for money? Yeah. There's an impact to your relationships, to the influence you have on those around you. And so solvable problem doesn't necessarily only have to do with how much money am I going to make? Because, and I think that's the point of this conversation, is there's other currencies that we have to consider here, because it's not all about the money.
Right. Oh, for sure. Because if you achieve your solvable problem, now you don't have to work for money. You have all the time in the world to influence and improve your relationships, right? So, yeah,
let's look at it from the other side too. Let's say that you're like, hey, I want to get to $10 million by the time I'm 40 years old, right? I'm 32. That's kind of a goal I have. But what if I told you, it's like, yeah, but you can do that. But when you get there, you're going to be overweight, out of shape. You're going to be probably let's say you get, I'm not saying this is the case, but let's say you're addicted to drugs and alcohol. You're getting a divorce because your wife can't stand you. Your kids don't look up to you because they never see you. But we're going to make sure you get that $10 million by the time you're 40.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, I don't want that. And the point is well, okay, so there's more than just money here. You have to consider the trade-off to these other currencies. Bring it back to timer. So what are you trading? If you're literally trading all your time and your effort just for money, there's trade-offs to that. Your relationships absolutely will suffer. Your impact and your influence absolutely will suffer.
Yeah.
So it's not all or nothing.
So I think, tying in some ways in real estate, not real estate exactly, but in some ways to real estate, like how does this apply if I want to sign up for a coaching program? Like I want to, um, do a certain number of transactions a month, or I want to, make a certain amount of money per year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm at a point now where I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a W-2 person, but I'm not making the kind of money I want to make. I'm not not having the kind of time I want to make. And I'm willing to sign up for a coach. It says money and time. It doesn't say anything about knowledge. It doesn't say anything about systems. It doesn't say anything about processes, techniques. So like, how does that all tie into Timer?
Good question. First of all, I don't claim to say that these are the only currencies. We very well probably have other currencies we're not considering here.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a fun acronym that makes it really easy to kind of think through. So with that being said,
well, I think there is though. I mean, I think that the time component. Right?
Sure. Well, I guess
time.
that's what I'm saying is when you're endeavoring to do something new, can we get clarity on why are we doing this in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing this to save time? For example, I've paid for a lot of coaches. I'm sure you have too.
Oh, yeah.
There's a reason we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
For one, I'm trying to get where I'm going quicker. Like it's a hack. It's a shortcut. You can learn what these other people know. That reduces the amount of effort I need to spend. It reduces the amount of time I need to spend. It also gets me relationships I wouldn't have otherwise had. And so when you do something new, I think it just comes down to clarity. Like, why are you doing this? What is it that you're actually trying to get more of here? Because one of the issue processors that we talk about in the certainty operating system says we don't have unlimited resources. So we need to optimize, not maximize for everything, right? So we want to optimize for the most important thing. If that's time, just bring clarity to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of look at, we talk about the W-2 component, right? We talk about Rich Dad Poor Dad, but I think the other thing too is for someone that subscribed to our channel with Real Estate Disruptors is they might not have done their first deal yet, or maybe they're still working a W-2 job, like where could they potentially, if they're trying to grow or trying to become a successful real estate investors, maybe they have to exchange effort and time, right? For money and influence, right? If you have a mentor who not necessarily one that you pay, but you're learning from them by hitting the phones for them, or you're door knocking, or you're driving for dollars, like you're exchanging effort, you're exchanging time, and hopefully in the process, you're buying some time, you're compressing time, you're gaining some money so you can pay your bills, and then maybe you create some valuable relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, you gave an example on a previous one of these calls. When we go to masterminds, what are we doing? We're trading our time, our money, and our energy for reputation.
Yeah.
Relationships. This is another way of saying that, right? And I think those are correlated things, right? Your reputation and your relationships. How do people see you?
Right.
And knowledge, honestly, now that you're saying this out, we talked about this however many times, like that seems like a currency worth trading. I would even call it just like experience, right? So you could add another E in there, right? You're trading time and money a lot of times just to gain experience,
for sure,
doing something. Because
another thing too is because we were in a group text with Nick. Another one he used was Tammy, right, which is written by Joe Polish. It was time, attention, money, effort, energy.
Attention,
and, yeah, and that's the one. Like, I remember the very first call I had with Larry Yatch, and he said, what is your most valuable asset? And most people say money, right? But like, hey, I'm a seasoned guy. I know what I'm doing, right? So I say time. He's like, nope, it's not time. It's like, really? Everyone says it's time. It's like, no, it's attention, right? Like, because if you can pay attention, if you can focus on something, then everything else improves, right? So like the example he uses is, have you ever been in a situation where it seemed like you're having it's a situation where you're having a lot of fun, having a really good time. It's like, I can't believe it's already over. Or if you're in a really bad situation, it feels like time slows down. So he kind of makes the argument that time's kind of like a figment of our not imagination, but like more conceptual than scientific, like we think it is.
Yeah, we just gave numbers to it and we can count it, but it's a little bit more abstract than that.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are your thoughts on that as far as attention and breaking up energy and effort?
Yeah, I think it just comes back to what we said a little bit ago, which is there's a lot of currencies. Timer is just a way to sort of bring some attention to that. But when you think about attention specifically, I mean, I would relate that to reputation relationships. I would relate that to also impact and influence. It is a little nuanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
But certainly there's a ton of currencies that we trade. And so bring it back to, okay, so what do we do with this?
Right.
That's
What's the
cool,
application?
Great. I don't, okay, there's a bunch of currencies. Yeah, cool. I get that. Well, look at your business, look at your investments in the same way I did over the last 6 months. And I looked around and it was like, I'm not actually getting more of the things that I want. I use this example about how I got into real estate to create passive income. And what happened? 2 years later, I don't actually have any more passive income than when I quit my job because I don't have a W-2. So I couldn't get loans. Now, of course, I will buy more passive income as we, move forward. So it's not a lost cause yet.
Mm-hmm.
But my business sure does look pretty active at this point. So, I traded a bunch of my time and my energy to hopefully get, a bunch of money that I could use to then buy more time and energy. And it didn't end up working that way. So, this brings me up to another thing that Dan mentioned over the weekend, which is there's a gap between, he calls it espoused values versus theories in action. And an easier way to say that is like what you say you do and you think you do, your beliefs about yourself. How is that relative to what you actually do, your behaviors?
Right.
So your thoughts and your feelings versus your behaviors. If we can get those things in alignment, that's how we create certainty.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, kind of to your point, right? Like we're talking about the solve a problem, talk about closer versus more, right? One of the 4 wealth commandments is that recognizing that these 4 currencies exist and that we don't have unlimited resources of all of them is that we have these obligations, right? Dr. Jeff Spencer talks about this, like, in our 30s and 40s, or maybe I could be completely butchering this, right? But at some point, we're signing up for all these obligations, right? Mm-hmm. So like, we start these companies, like, okay, with each company, it's gonna have more active income or more income, not active my part, passive ideally. But with each company, when things go south, I am not getting more free time, right?
Right.
I have to now reallocate my resources, take time away from this business and put time into this business and expend more energy and resources, effort to get this company back up to a spot where hopefully it won't need me again. But one of the common things that happens in every business is that you're going to hit hiccups. You're going to hit whether you have a separation, people leaving, someone getting fired, someone quitting, or God forbid someone gets injured, right? Or an illness in the family and they're no longer available. But we keep adding obligations to our plate and then believing everything's gonna be perfect. But the one thing we know is that things are never perfect.
No, they're not. Well, Randy Massengale said to us that for every person you add to your team, every direct report adds a minimum of 4 hours to your work week.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just describe this. I'm gonna give a personal anecdote for how I thought about business, and maybe those out there have done similar things, and you can relate to this. So I thought that by getting into business for myself, I was going to be able to get more passive income. And then what did I do? I went and I have all these different marketing channels we were doing direct mail, we were doing, pay-per-click, we were doing cold calling. I mean, all sorts of stuff. Door knocking we've done. And I hired 2 or 3 people, and then that turned into 4 or 5 people. And it was like, okay, so every single time we grow the business, I'm adding more time to my plate, which is actually getting me further away from what I want, which is passive income or time to focus on businesses that, let's say, have significantly higher upside, like what we're working on with Whale Club.
Yeah.
Well, I quickly had this realization that, oh my gosh, I'm collecting all these obligations because I have this natural tendency towards more, just like we all do. We're all hardwired to not be satisfied, to go for more and more and more, and we're competitive. So what do? We hire more people. We expand to more markets. We do these things because we're going to make more money, but it's not just about considering money in the vacuum. It's like, yeah, but what do you have to trade in order to make that money?
Yeah.
And is there a better place to make money that aligns with the other currencies that you want? Right.
Right. Another thing too, I mean, this is something I learned a long time ago when I first got into business was like, how much do you have in your bank account? Like, what are you worth? And the person said to me, he's like, money is irrelevant. It's like, what do you mean? He's like, money's only is only useful for keeping score to let me know my progress, which made a lot of sense at the time. But now as we're understanding the concept of closer versus more and the 4 wealth commandments and this and that, no, it's not a scorecard. There's other things we need to have on that scorecard.
Well, bring it back to the example. What if I told you could have everything you want with money, but you were divorced and overweight and, on and on and on, the negative things that we could say about somebody. So it's like, well, of course I wouldn't want that situation. Okay. So you acknowledge that there's trade-offs. So that's all that timer is really there to do. And let's bring it back to the 4 wealth commandments. So first one is closer versus more. Well, how the heck do you know if you're getting closer to the currencies you really want? If you haven't clearly defined that, we call it clarity. So this was something that Dr. Jeff sort of showed, and we adapted it. Nick sort of slightly adapted it. So we want clarity, which leads to certainty. And then he says collapse time. So if we can actually get clarity on the currencies that we want, the solvable problem, how we're going to get there, which is like the roadmap. How do we do it? We say with least amount of risk, least amount of effort, most amount of options. That's all kind of in this clarity bucket. We take that and we use it to build a plan to get us the things that we want. That's certainty. And then we look for opportunities to get there quicker with least amount of risk, least amount of effort, most amount of options. So, this is like the progression that we were taught in the Certainty OS. And this is how we're helping folks in the Whale Club actually use these things, use these tools. It's not just theory. If it stays as theory, it's just a bunch of random acronyms and words. Like, how can we use this in our real life? And it comes back to accountability. You need a community of people. We need a shared language so that when we say things like timer and case, like we talked about last week, and we say the 3 C's, clarity, certainty, collapse, time. It's a shortcut for all of us to get to our point.
Is there someone we can think of right now in the Whale Club that, as we've gone through this, you can see that they clearly have modified their behavior, understanding timer, and it's modified their behavior?
Yes. I was actually talking with Mike Stansberry, who's a CG CG Premier member. And, I think it really clicked for him, and it clicked for me in the same way when somebody said, I just want to have a boring business. Like, I just want it to run. I got into it's the same thing. Like, I got into real estate for it to be passive. But I'm constantly putting out fires. I'm constantly like hiring new people because this person left. And then the challenges as a business owner. I don't have to tell you, right? Like, we get it. And so what Mike came to the realization was like, oh my gosh, I got into the business for the same exact reason, because I wanted to create a business that ran. You know, we all read the 4-Hour Work Week. You know, a lot of us, Tim Ferriss, we read that book, and our business doesn't look anything like that. You know, I wouldn't say that we're always the linchpin. A lot of us have a way to sort of step back a little bit, but I wouldn't consider that a win just because you're not the linchpin, right? It's like, how much time, when we talk about reliability, if, you know, you said the other day, if you can't take a vacation, like, that's not a business I want. I don't want to own that business.
I don't want to invest in a business where an owner can never take a vacation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Mike was sort of like, wow, I need to start really looking at, where am I allocating resources to things that are actually getting me closer to what I want. You know, he's talking about moving down to 30A, and he wants more time with his kids because they're, you know, kind of in that age where you can spend more time with them. So, you know, that's the most specific example, because I just talked with Mike about it, but everybody's rewiring their brain in a certain way to, man, is my business actually serving me? Are my investments actually serving me?
Right. And guys, we're gonna put the wait list for the Whale Club in the description. So definitely check that out if you're interested in working with us in the Whale Club. How about you, Paul? Like, can you give specifically how you modified your behavior once you understood the timer principles?
Before I got into the CCA, I was spending about 16, 17 grand a month in marketing, you know. A lot of that was direct mail. A lot of that, and I don't mean to pick on direct mail. Sometimes I pick on direct mail,
But
fine.
It's like, it's fine. Jason Lewis is a Whale Club member. I'm sure he won't mind.
I'm still an Investor Machine user. We still use direct mail, but it serves me now. And let me describe this scenario, right? If you want to do direct mail, if you want to do, let's say, more than about 3 to 4 deals a month, which is about what we do right now. You know, we were trying to get to like 8, you know, and I didn't really have a good reason, just because I want to do 8. That's it. Yeah, it's more. That was all it was. It's just, I want to double the volume. That's it. If you want to do direct mail, you've got to have a really a great CRM that can do drip campaigns, that is high alert. We use Left Main, great CRM. You know, you got to have a lead manager. We're paying for a lot of data. So, okay, so we're probably wasting it if we're not also calling and texting that list, which means we need to hire cold callers and texters. And we also need a lead manager, because they're going to have to manage all this. And we probably need more than one salesperson, because we're going to need to grow. And so I had 2. So it's like, so that one decision to go from 3 to 4 deals a month, where I was doing fine. Like, my big, it wasn't the home run hits that I was looking for. Like, you know, I've talked to you about pop tops, right? Like, I can make an entire year's worth of wholesaling fees in one pop top with almost no effort, right? But I was caught in this chasing more deals. And so because of that, I took on so many more obligations. I've got to hire all these people and all these systems and all these services. And if it breaks, everyone's freaking out, and now everybody can't do their job. And so I realized, like, I don't want to do more deals. Actually, I was just caught in competition with guys like you. And I'm like, man, I really want to do more deals. How do I get into their game?
You want to chase the clickbait headlines, which right. I'm guilty of as well, right? Guilty of chasing and guilty of making them. So we had Steve Valentine on the show a few weeks ago. He talked about how we actually brought up timer during the show because his dad, right, in this back in 2005, 2006, 2007, is like, yeah, we're doing a lot of real estate deals. Let's go ahead and monetize the audience we have, right? The reach we have. So let's go ahead and start an AC company. Let's start a plumbing company. Let's start a painting company, right? Because they're already buying the properties and they need it painted. They need to replace the AC units. They need these repairs and landscaping, right? They need all these things. Let's go ahead and, you know, sell them their fries and Coke on top of the hamburger. And what did they do? They expended more resources. They hired more people. And what ended up happening is anytime you hire more people, you need to hire more people to manage those people and even more people to manage those people, right? And the result, unfortunately, was because he's never grown a business that size before, was that the plumbing company was unreliable. The AC company was unreliable. And because those particular companies, those vendors, did not perform at a very high level, it tarnished his reputation. So he went from this guy who like, oh, let's go, like we have to buy a house, we have to sell a house, we want to run a property, let's go to this guy. And because their experience with the vendors left such a bad taste, it not only hurt the ancillary companies, it hurt the main hub.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I'm sure that if we polled most of the folks at Family Mastermind or at CG, they're like, I've stepped in that more than once, right? Like we've made these mistakes. We're going to continue making this mistake. I wrote down this little comment. I was like, most of us don't want a big business. We think we do. We really don't. What we want is we want the result of the big business, right? So, and it may turn out to be that, hey, we want a big business because we want to make a massive impact on a lot of people's lives. Okay, we'll recognize that's going to come with trade-offs. Means you're gonna spend a lot of energy doing that. You don't just make a massive impact on the world by having a small, profitable, lean business.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't recapture the resources from that and go do a different venture that could make a massive impact. But that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, well, I got my real estate business because I want it to serve me. Basically, right? I want it to help me find passive income, and I need it to be boring. I need it to be easy. Now, that has nothing to do with profitability, right? I want it to be highly profitable. That's of course, but most importantly, bring it back to the barbell. Where does this sit on the barbell? If it's a reliable, if it's on the reliable side of the barbell, it can't be a job. That's not reliability. If you don't show up every day and run the business, it doesn't run. Okay, that is a job. That's not a reliable source of cash flow. So call it like it is. That's all we're saying. It's like, we'll call it like it is. If you've got a job, then you got a job. It's like, you're not an investor. You're not in the owner's box. You have a job wrapped in entrepreneurship, which oftentimes comes with more obligation.
Right. More obligation, more risk, less time, potentially risking your reputation and influence and money,
right,
and energy. So I think that's the big takeaway, right? It's just really, we want everyone to be aware of the currencies. And if you're aware of the currencies, now anytime you make a decision, you say, okay, which of these am I potentially either expending, trading away, because we're talking about infinite trade-offs, or potentially at risk of losing it because of this decision. So I think that's a pretty good spot to wrap up. There was anything else you want to add before we close out?
I would like to add something about the fluidity of this. I'm 32. What I wanted when I was 28, 29, I wasn't married. I was just coming off of a traveling all the time, right? I thought I wanted something, right? And what did Dr. Jeff Spencer talk about with his humans versus champions mindset? Everybody gets caught up in like, but I said this. I made this promise to myself. This is what I said. And by God, I'm a man of my word. I'm going to do what I say at all costs, regardless of the trade-offs of that, right? And so what I wanted at 29 is very different than what I want at 32. I've been married now for a year. We're talking about having kids. In 3 years, when I'm 35, it's fairly reasonable to assume I'm going to want something even entirely different than what I want now.
Yeah.
So if we don't give ourselves that grace and flexibility to allow ourselves to personally grow and develop over time, realizing that target's going to move around a little bit, that's life. This is what Dan calls an infinite game.
Yeah.
Understanding your currencies, what you want, is going to change. Get used to that. If you build these rigid structures, that's like, well, hey, I'm taking off into doing this business because I want one thing, money. Well, then you might get down the road and you realize, well, I got enough money. I can actually use this business now to create a massive impact on the world. Or I use this business, like I use a lot of my real estate businesses to get me more relationships. I mean, that's how we met.
Right.
Right. It's like through my real estate business, I grew a lot of lifelong relationships, you know? And so I don't look at that business and say, well, let's get rid of it. It has usefulness. Right? It's not necessarily the most profitable thing that I do, but it brings me a lot of relationships that I wouldn't otherwise have. So it's just another example of, well, when I recognize that my real estate business is not going to be this home run, and it might be for others, it's just not for me. I don't want that. That's not my home run. I want it to be reliable, and I want it to attract the people that I want to be in business with.
That's awesome.
So, it's okay for the target to move. That's what I want to kind of get across with that last piece. This is an infinite game of constantly reevaluating what it is you want. And this comes back to the investor frame. Knowing what I know now, would I opt into this business? Because knowing what I know now, maybe money isn't the most important thing. Or actually, maybe it was relationships, but now it's like, you know what? We need to put some damn money in the bank. Right. It's like knowing what I know now with this economic shift, you know, so allow yourself the flexibility. I had to do that with myself. You know, I'm one that's real hard on myself about what I said I was going to do this.
Yeah. It's tough.
You deal with that?
It's tough. I mean, we talk about reputation, right? Like my dad, when I was growing up, he always told me, like, you only have one name. You cannot tarnish your name. And like, how do we reconcile, right? Like you can't do everything you say you're going to do. Cause if it costs you if it costs you one of the timers, right? But at the same time, you know, we talk about integrity as a core value. Like, how do you reconcile it? And, you know, Nick kind of put it into perspective, which is interesting. Still wrapping my head around this. But stop making so many promises. All right? Stop making promises that you may not be able to fulfill. Oh, okay.
Even to yourself, like even internal promises. It's not even external. It's just that we associate our identity with, I'm someone who, when they say they're going to do something, they do it every time without exception.
Right.
You know, I was taught that as a kid.
I was taught the same thing. But what if that decision, again, going back to the very beginning, led to 40 years old with type 2 diabetes, who kids don't love you, right? Because they felt like you're an absentee father, and a wife that's, you know, maybe hanging out with the fitness trainer a little bit too much, you know? Like, is it worth it? So,
I mean, these are the things, right? Like there's an infinite number of trade-offs. So couple things that I hope that folks can take out of this is, if you don't have clarity, on the actual currencies that you want, you might be maximizing for everything. You can really only optimize for one or two things. And that's going to change. So that's the hard part. It's like, you can't just put your head down and barrel through life without picking it up and saying, like, knowing what I know now, does that still make sense? Do I still want the same things? And as Mr. Dan Nicholson says, I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah, it's my favorite quotes. So let's do this. We're going to put a link for the wait list if you guys are interested in joining us in the Whale Club. I'm going to put a post on Twitter. Give us a 6-word updates. Let me know what you guys took away from today's episode, and then we'll see you guys next week.